My husband spent $25,000 of our savings on jewelry for his spoiled sister without telling me. When I confronted him, he called me a stupid housewife. But when he lost his job and came begging for help, my answer left him broken. I'm 30 years old, I was married for 4 years, and now I'm divorced. The truth is, I still find it hard to believe how everything ended, because when I married Steven, I thought it was forever. You know, we had plans, we wanted to have kids, buy a bigger house, all those things that normal couples plan together. But it turns out there are things you don't see until it's too late. And in my case, what I didn't see was how willing my ex-husband was to put me second every time his younger sister snapped her fingers. I guess I should start from the beginning, so this makes sense. Because the story of how my marriage went to shit in a matter of weeks is pretty incredible. And when I say incredible, I don't mean it in a good way. I met Steven when I was 24. He was 27. And we met at a work conference. I was working in marketing for a medium-sized company, and he was a project manager at a construction company. He was attentive, funny, ambitious, everything you look for in someone, or at least, that's what I thought. We got married 2 years after meeting, and the first few years were good. I mean, we had the normal fights that all couples have, but nothing serious. Nothing that made me think that 3 years later I'd be signing divorce papers. What I did notice from the beginning, and looking back, I should have paid more attention to this, was the relationship Steven had with his younger sister, Michelle. She was like 23 when I met her, and she was, and still is, as far as I know, the spoiled child of the family. It's not that I hated Michelle at first, but I did think she was way too used to being given everything she wanted without having to work for anything. Michelle lived with her parents, not because she was studying or saving money, but simply because she had never had to become independent. Her parents paid for everything, the car, clothes, outings, everything. And Steven, well, Steven also contributed constantly. Every time she wanted something her parents wouldn't buy her, she'd call her older brother, and he'd give it to her. I'd mention it to Steven from time to time, like, don't you think you should let her learn to fend for herself? But he'd always tell me she was his little sister, that he was just helping her, that it wasn't a big deal. And it wasn't a big deal at first, honestly, because we were talking about small things, like paying for her movie ticket or buying her some clothes when they went shopping together. But over time it escalated, and I kind of started to feel like Michelle took up too much space in our married life. About 1.5 years ago, I left my job. It wasn't because I didn't want to work, but because the company where I was had massive layoffs, and they included me in the list. It was shit. Honestly, because I liked my job and the salary was good, but well, these things happen. I told Steven I was going to take a couple months to look for something better instead of accepting the first thing that came up, and he agreed. We had savings, he earned well, so it wasn't like we were in financial crisis or anything like that. During those months, I was sending out resumes, going to interviews, and meanwhile I was taking care of the house, cooking, cleaning, all those things. It didn't bother me to do it because I knew it was temporary, but Steven started making weird comments, like, it's good that you have so much free time now, or, it must be nice not having to wake up early every day. Comments like that made me feel like I was on vacation instead of actively looking for work. Then came Michelle's 27th birthday, which was like 8 months ago, and her parents threw her a party at their house. It wasn't anything super fancy, just family and some close friends. But Michelle was super excited because, according to her, she was going to receive incredible gifts. I went with Steven, and honestly, I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. I thought it would be a normal birthday party. Michelle opened her parents' gifts first, which were nice things but not over the top, like brand name clothes and a purse she'd been wanting. Then she opened gifts from other people, and finally got to Steven's gift. And when she opened the box, when she saw what was inside, she literally screamed. It was a jewelry set. And I'm not talking about something you buy at a department store. I'm talking about a necklace, earrings, and a bracelet in white gold with diamonds. Michelle was crying with excitement, hugged Steven, thanked him like 1,000 times, and everyone at the party was impressed. I just stood there smiling, but inside I was in total shock because Steven hadn't mentioned anything to me about that gift. When we got home that night, I asked him about the jewelry. Like, how much did that cost? And he told me not to worry, that he had it covered. I insisted because it seemed to me that something so expensive should have been a joint decision, especially considering I was out of work and he finally told me it had cost $25,000. $25,000. I was speechless. I said, "Stephen, where did you get $25,000 to buy your sister a gift without even mentioning it to me?" And he got super defensive. Told me it was his money, that he worked and could spend it on whatever he wanted. I responded that yes, technically it was his money, but that we were married. That those kinds of decisions should be made together. And he simply told me it was already done and we weren't going to argue about it. But I couldn't let it go like that. You know, $25,000 is not a small amount. So, the next day, I checked our joint savings account. And that's when I discovered the truth. Stephen had withdrawn exactly $25,000 from our savings account, the account where we had saved money for emergencies and to eventually put a down payment on a bigger house. But not only that, he had also disabled the bank alerts that sent me notifications every time there were large movements in the account. I mean, he literally did everything possible to keep me from finding out. When I confronted him, when I showed him the bank statement and told him he had completely violated my trust, he got angry. He told me I was overreacting, that the money would come back because his company had just landed a big project and he was going to receive a $25,000 advance for that project. So technically he was only using the money temporarily. I yelled at him. Told him that didn't justify anything. That he should have told me. That he had no right to take that amount of money without consulting me. And then, and this was what really finished destroying everything, Stephen looked at me and said, "You're a stupid, irrational housewife. Get a job and stop bothering me about how I spend my money." Housewife. He called me a housewife like it was an insult, like the fact that I was between jobs turned me into someone who didn't deserve to have an opinion about our finances. I stood there feeling like I'd been slapped, and I couldn't even speak because I was too angry and hurt. I told him I was going to stay with my parents for a while, that I needed space, and he told me to do whatever I wanted, that he didn't care. I packed some things and left that same night. My parents received me without asking questions. Well, they did ask me what had happened, but when I explained, they understood why I needed to be there. My mom was furious with Stephen, my dad too, but both told me to take the time I needed to think things through clearly. Stephen called me the next day, but I didn't answer. He sent me messages asking me to come home, but I responded that I wasn't going to return until he really apologized and acknowledged that what he did was wrong. He sent me a message saying he was sorry, but it was a super generic apology. Like, "I'm sorry you felt that way." You know, one of those apologies that aren't really apologies. So I told him it wasn't enough, and I stopped responding. About 2 weeks went by, and then Stephen called me in total panic. Turns out his company had lost the project. The client had backed out, and now Stephen had to return the $25,000 advance he had already received. But obviously he didn't have that money because he'd spent it on Michelle's jewelry. He asked me if we could meet, and I agreed because I thought maybe he was finally going to admit he'd screwed up. We met at a cafe near my parents' house, and Stephen looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. He explained the situation with the project, and then told me he had talked to Michelle, that he had asked her to return the jewelry so he could sell it and recover the money. And Michelle had told him no, that the gift was already hers and she wasn't going to return it. I couldn't believe it. I asked him if his parents had tried to convince Michelle to do the right thing, and Stephen told me, yes, that he had talked to them, but that his mom had taken Michelle's side, telling him that a gift is a gift and you can't ask for it back. His dad apparently agreed that Michelle should help her brother, but didn't do anything concrete to pressure her. Stephen was desperate. He told me he needed me to withdraw another $25,000 from our savings account so he could return the advance to his company, that otherwise he could lose his job. And I just sat there looking at him, and all I could think was, is this really happening? Is he really asking me to use our emergency money again to get him out of a problem he caused himself? I told him no. I told him that he had made the decision to spend $25,000 on a ridiculously expensive gift for his spoiled sister without consulting me, that he had violated my trust, that he had insulted me, and that now he had to find a solution on his own. Stephen started begging, literally. Told me I didn't understand how serious this was, that if he didn't return that money, his career would be ruined. I told him maybe he should have thought about that before being so irresponsible. He called me selfish, told me I just wanted to see him suffer. What kind of wife was I? And that was it for me. I told him the conversation was over and got up from the table. He kept calling me, sending me messages, but I had already made my decision. The next day, I called a lawyer, specializing in divorces. I hadn't thought about divorcing when I went to my parents' house. Honestly, I just thought we needed time apart for Steven to reflect on what he'd done. But after that conversation at the cafe, I realized there was no going back. I explained the whole situation to the lawyer, and he told me I had a solid case, especially considering Steven had withdrawn money from a joint account without my knowledge. He recommended I freeze the savings account so he couldn't withdraw more money. So that's what I did. I also changed all my banking passwords and made sure Steven didn't have access to anything else. Steven eventually solved his money problem using his personal savings. He had a personal account separate from our joint account, where he kept money for his own things. So he used that money to return the advance. But by that point, it was too late. I had already decided I wanted a divorce. When he received the divorce papers, I think he finally understood I was serious. He showed up at my parents' house with all my stuff in boxes, left them at the entrance, and knocked on the door. My dad answered, and Steven asked to talk to me. I went out and he was crying, told me he had made a terrible mistake, that Michelle was selfish, and that he had been an idiot for prioritizing her over me, that he wanted us to try to fix things. I told him it was too late, that it wasn't just about the money, but about everything that came after, the insults, the lack of respect, the fact that he had needed everything to explode in his face to realize he had done something wrong. He asked me if we could at least try couples therapy, and I told him no, that I longer wanted to be married to him. Steven stood there at my parents' house entrance for like 10 more minutes, trying to convince me, but I went inside the house and closed the door. I blocked him from everything. Phone, social media, everything. The divorce process took about 2 months, because we didn't have children, and the division of assets was relatively simple. I didn't want to fight over the money he had spent on the jewelry. I just wanted my share of the remaining savings and to move on with my life. During those 2 months, Steven tried to contact me through mutual friends, but I asked them not to pass along his messages. Honestly, I had nothing more to say to him. The divorce was finalized without major drama. We both signed the papers, and that was it. 4 years of marriage ended with a signature. The day we finalized everything officially, when I left the lawyer's office with the signed papers, Steven was waiting for me outside. He gave me a letter, told me to read it, when I was ready, and left. I didn't open the letter until a week later, and it was basically a long apology where he admitted everything, where he said he had been the worst husband in the world, that he understood why I had made the decision to divorce, and that he hoped someday I could forgive him, and maybe we could try again. At the end of the letter, he wrote that he loved me and would always love me. I read the letter only once and put it away in a drawer. I didn't respond, didn't look for him, just moved forward. Now, about 8 months after all this happened, I'm better. I found a job at a new company where they're paying me more than I was earning at my previous job, which is great. I also started my own small marketing consulting business from home, something I always wanted to do but never had the time. My parents continue to be my greatest support, and I'm incredibly grateful to them for receiving me without judging me. Sometimes I think about Steven, about how we could have been happy if he had been different, if he had put our marriage first instead of pleasing his sister all the time. But then I remember how he treated me, how he called me a housewife like it was the worst thing in the world, and I know I made the right decision. I don't know what happened with Michelle or with the relationship between her and Steven after the divorce. I guess she still has her $25,000 jewelry and probably continues to be the spoiled child she always was. As for Steven, I heard through the grapevine that he's still working at the same company and never had problems with lost projects again, so I guess he's fine. I don't have resentment toward him. Honestly, I just think we were incompatible in ways we didn't see until it was too late. He needed someone who would be willing to accept that his sister would always be a priority, and I needed someone who would respect me and treat me as an equal. Last week, a friend asked me if I would ever consider getting back with Steven, if he really apologized, if he showed that he changed. I told her no, that some things, once they break, can't be repaired, and I think that's what happened with my marriage. It broke in such a complete way that there's no way to fix it, and that's okay. I'm learning to be alone, to build my life the way I want, without having to consult with someone who wasn't going to listen to my opinion anyway. And that, I guess, is enough for now.